At this time, we want to start our Tuesday engagement, and I want to take this opportunity to invite our parish minister who will pray for us and then invite our speaker. Karibu sana mchungaji.
Thank you, Elder Simon, for the welcome. I once again want to welcome all of us in tonight's virtual engagement. We want to also welcome our speaker, who is a financial consultant, Joyce. We are happy to have you. So I'll pray and then you take over. Let us pray. Dear God, our loving Father, we thank you so much for giving us a chance to learn about finances. We ask that God Almighty, you will help us to grow from one level to another, that what we shall learn today, Lord, will make us better people, even as we are stewards over the resources that you have given us. So bless us tonight and use your servant, for this is our prayer of faith in Jesus' name. Amen. Karibu Joyce.
Asante sana. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. This evening I'm happy. And this evening, for those who did not manage to join us last week, I may just reintroduce myself. Like Reverend has said, my name is Joyce Kirimi, and I'm born again. I love Christ as my personal Savior, and I delight in His grace. And so as we even engage over matters of finances and whatever else, God's grace is what runs me and runs my life. And then the other matters like finances will come in. And as he rightly said, I consult on financial matters, and we will be engaging with you this evening. And last week we dealt with financial freedom, which is kind of an introduction into the matter of finances. And for purposes of those who are not with us last week, maybe just a recap of the main highlights that we dealt with last week when we dealt with financial freedom. We touched on eligibility. We tackled 4 issues touching on financial freedom, which we said is a journey. We talked about eligibility, who is eligible, and we said everybody is eligible to travel that journey of financial freedom and to achieve it, all at different stages. The other thing we then talked about were the stages that we all find ourselves in as we travel that road. And then we discussed the actions that we all need to take at our own separate and individual lives. And while we understand what actions we all need to take, each individually, we were not ignorant of the distractors that may come our way to block us from being financially free. So we tackled those 4: eligibility, the stages that are there, and the action that we all need to take, and the distractors that come and block our way. When we talk about action, because I want to draw us closer to what we are talking about today, which is loans and debt, dealing with loans and debt, under the actions that we need to take, we highlighted a number, not to say that they are all that we can do, but out of the 8 that we highlighted, there was planning and setting goals, there was budgeting, there was the matter of getting off credit or debt, there is the issue of saving, there is the issue of investing. We talked about consulting experts, or educating yourself, looking for literature and learning and educating yourself about finances. We also talked about maintaining our property and body health, appropriately so that it doesn't suffer from wear and tear, which costs us financially at the end of the day. And lastly, we concluded by saying we all need to live within our means, or even better, live below our means, which means we live below what we earn. So out of all those action points that we highlighted last week, number 3, remember we said that one of the actions is getting off credit or debt. And today that is why we are dealing with loans and debt, because it's usually a big issue in our lives, we must acknowledge. And so as we engage with it, I will encourage us to be very open-minded. Prepare your questions, even what I may not touch on, whatever that question you have regarding loans and credit and debt, I welcome you to put it down at the chat section, or you can have it ready with you once we are done. We'll have room for you to raise your hand and ask your question. So we go straight into our topic of the day, having that background from last week. And I'm sure most of us exactly loan. And I request my colleague, I really maybe to bring up the presentation. As we deal with loans and debt, we'll be asking ourselves, what exactly does it mean? What is a loan? What is a debt? Because we very often just throw those words around. And it is as simple as something that is borrowed and is expected to be paid back or to be given back. That is what a loan or a debt is. And the only distinction that we have is that when we most often refer to loans, we are mostly constrained to talk about money, loans with the bank, loans from circles, something to do with the liquid cash. While debt is a bit wider because it involves or includes other things that may not necessarily be liquid cash that we are talking about. It may be about property. I gave you my property which you requested and you were to either pay for it or return it. It becomes a debt. It may be something to do with services that are rendered. Maybe you went and saw your lawyer for some legal services. You went and saw your doctor for some medical attention, and you so received a service, but you did not pay for it. Then it becomes a debt, because then you owe that person who offered you that service, and they don't give you money. That is why I'm making this distinction. And you can think about very many other things, whether it is property, whether it is services, whether it is bills like goods that we are offered or services that we are offered by service providers. If it is something that you're expected to pay for and you have not paid for it when you're consuming it, then it becomes a debt, because it has a consideration that is equivalent or can be equated with cash. And basically, when we have this conversation today, that is the kind of understanding that I want us to have about what exactly are these loans and debts that we are talking about. Even when you think about going to your grocer up there, up your estate or down your village or wherever you are, and you go to your grocer and you pick a couple of items and you don't have money to pay for it right now, when you're picking those items, you're creating a debt. You're getting yourself into a debt. So I want us to think as wide as that, as opposed to just constraining ourselves into just the loan that we would get from a financial institution. And even in this discussion, as much as I will largely address or speak to the loans that are majorly with financial institutions and other big people or big creditors, let us not forget about those other arrangements that constitute a debt. That is why I thought it would be important for us to understand this from the beginning, so that all those things that I will say, addressing those are kind of loans with the banks and with whoever else, will be applicable to those simple debts that we think about, or those small debts that we think about, that we have around our lives every other day. And so what basically are the types of loans that we think about when we think about debt and credit? What are the types of loans that come to us or that we go to seek? And we consider mortgages, asset financing, business loans, personal loans, which could be secured or unsecured. We could be talking about education loans and student loans. Here we see education loans and student loans, because education loans could be taken by either parents or the sponsors or a guardian, while the student loans are taken by the students themselves. We continue with the types of loans. We could think about car loans, salary loans, medical loans, emergency loans, development loans, home improvement loans, all type of loans that we can think of, even more, like if you consider our financial institutions craft more than even this, they call them different names. And that being the background of the types of loans and debts that we consider, this evening I want us to consider seven things that are very critical considerations that we always have to make or need to make when we are borrowing, especially when we are considering borrowing from those financial institutions and microfinance and whoever else gives us credit. I want us to think about the purpose for which we borrow. I want us to think about the repayments. We need to think about the security for the loans. We think about the creditors that we deal with. We'll talk about the term of the loans that we deal with. We'll talk about the interest, and we'll also talk about other incidental costs. And even after talking about these considerations, we will also touch on something that you cannot talk about loans and forget to talk about. And this is the matter about default or arrears or delinquency or falling behind schedule, because it affects a lot of us when we borrow. And so I will want us to also have a look at that at the end of the conversation. So when we talk about purpose, I want us to think about purpose, because when you go to consider seeking loans from banks, SACCOs, or whoever your creditors are, these things are the things that they think about. These are the things that they look at. These are the considerations that they also take. They may not take a consideration of all of them, but enough of these considerations are what the creditors think about. And when you look at that slide on purpose, where you have that sack of money and there's a question mark on top of it, the question you need to ask yourself is, why do I need this loan? Now that you have determined you need the loan, ask yourself, why do I need the loan? And what the loan is for must be a legal purpose. It means you cannot go borrowing, especially from the regulated
financiers, you cannot go to seek a loan for a purpose that is illegal. Like you go to take out a loan to start a changa business if changa in your area is illegal, or you go and seek out to take a loan to start a brothel, which is illegal in our country. So the purpose for which you're taking out the loan must be legal. The purpose should also be moral. And a question of morality is a bit relative, because what may seem moral, may be considered moral to one, may not be moral to the other person. But more importantly, I want us to calm down, because those are what are dictated by those who are lending. But because we are speaking with ourselves this evening, it's not about the creditors now. I want us to think about the personal justification. Remember last week we said that everything financial, we must look at it from a very personal perspective. So even when you're thinking about the purpose for your loan, you must justify it personally and give it a personal justification. And I'll give an example. I said, like, even when you walk to your grocer up there in your estate to pick out a few items and you don't have money to pay for it now, that is a debt and you are getting yourself into credit. But it may be justified if you have no food to eat for that evening for your family. But look at it from another perspective. You have the basic needs and you have food to eat, but you go to the butcher up there and you go and take out some chicken on credit. And it is not like, even if you didn't have that chicken that day in your house, nothing bad would happen, nothing much would go wrong. So that personal justification, you have to always think about it so that you don't end up loading on yourself debts that are not necessary, that are not justified, but that is at a very personal level. And the other thing when you're considering about purpose is you must never divert. Once you borrow funds or you borrow something or you take out something on a debt, if you borrow that money to go and buy a cow, make sure that you use it for that purpose. Don't divert any borrowed funds, because that ends up getting you into trouble, because you will still need to go and get more money to do that which was initially intended, and you will also get into trouble with the creditors if they come and find that you are not trustworthy enough to apply the borrowed funds into what it was intended for. Another consideration when you're thinking about purpose is that the purpose for which you borrow the money should more or less be to finance an asset as opposed to a liability. Don't go borrowing money to put into something that will still need to eat your money up. You need to borrow to put into an asset that will not drain you more once you put that money that you have borrowed into. So consider the asset versus liability, and that purpose for which you're thinking to borrow the money, direct that money into an asset as opposed to a liability. Once you consider the purpose for which you're borrowing, and your purpose is justified, and you're thinking like, yeah, this is it, I can't do without it, then think about the repayment for that loan. And repayment, we have to always remember that a loan repayment is just giving back money or paying back in whatever form, because we said debt can be maybe not in the form of money. Giving back or paying back what you owe somebody else. Only that you owe a large amount of money, but the creditor allows you to repay or give back at smaller portions of money and at regular intervals, so that you don't feel the weight of just paying back the whole lump sum. So consider the repayment that will be coming to you at those regular intervals. Psalms 37:21 tells us that the wicked borrow and do not repay, but the righteous give generously. So because I believe we are in the group of the righteous, and we are not in the category of the wicked. So let us always have in mind when we are borrowing or when we are taking out that credit, that we are borrowing to repay, so that we don't become the wicked by not repaying loans and amounts that don't belong to us. When you're thinking about repayment, think about your source of repayment, your source of income. Where will that repayment be coming from? Is it your salary? Is it your business income? What is the form of your earning? When you consider that income, do you have ability to repay? That is, when you think about repayment, you think about your ability to repay the amount that you're told that this will be your repayment. Because if the repayment is not within your margin of the net disposable income, that sounds a bit technical. Net disposable income, what is it? Mostly when you earn the net you get at your payslip, if you're a salaried person, or if you're in business, the net income that you get after deducting all expenses and payments of whatever owes out to people that you owe money as a business, that net is not your net disposable income. Because if you're on salary, it means you have other obligations to meet with your net pay. So net disposable income is the net after you have removed. If you have your salary, you come and pay your electricity, you pay your worker, you pay your, so that leaves you with what is your net disposable income. And that is why when you go to borrow, like for instance, from a financial institution, they will tell you that some will tell you we consider your living expenses to be a particular percentage. Some will tell you maybe 25%. So that out of your net income, 75% becomes what is net disposable income. So consider the net amount that is considered towards your repayment, so that you don't get strained thinking that if your payslip is reading net income of 100,000, then you think you can go borrowing a loan to be repaid at 95,000, because that will be unwise, because what will you be living on? So consider that when you're thinking about going to borrow as a part of your repayment. Consider also the sustainability of your income, whether it's business or salary. What terms are you on in your job? Are you permanently employed? Are you on contract? Are you on casual work? Is your contract fixed? Is it a long-term contract for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Because that then determines the kind of repayment that you're able to commit yourself to, because is it sustainable? Because even if today you have a net disposable income of 100,000 and you are on a contract, a short-term contract of 1 year, and then you go borrowing a loan which you're supposed to repay, or whose repayment run and stretch for 5 years, then you will be making an unwise decision, because you are not able to sustain. Your income is not sustainable. If you're relying on business, how stable is your business? Is it a startup? Has it stabilized that you're able to depend on that business income consistently and regularly, so that you're able to honor your repayments? Consider that when you're looking at the repayment and the repayment amount. Once you consider the repayment and those things that I've talked about, the source, the ability to pay, and the sustainability, then you'd have to think about something we call security. And security means, when you can see that image on your screen, is showing a very beautiful house, and it looks all good, but the house is all chained up and locked. imefungwa. So when you're thinking about security for a loan or for a debt, you think about such kind of kufungwa na nyororo, because it means that the object that you have given to be the security for your loan is tied until you repay that loan. And Proverbs 22:7, and we alluded to it last week, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. Because when you're chained, all chained, then it means you're a slave to that person who has chained you. And mostly it's the financial institutions. So when you're thinking about borrowing, ask yourself, for this loan or for this debt I am taking, is security required? And if security is required, what security is required for this kind of loan? Is the worth of that security equivalent to the worth and purpose of the loan that I'm taking? Is what I'm borrowing worth the risk of tying the security that is required? Because when you go to the bank, for instance, they will tell you, we will tie your business assets, we will tie your residential house, or we'll tie your car or something if it needs security, or we will attach your payslip. So ask yourself whether the risk is worth taking. If it is worth, then you will say it is justified to tie your valuable asset. But if it is not as worth, if you have second thoughts, then it means it's not as valuable a debt as it seems. And the most reasonable thing would be let that loan pass. Maybe you can wait, maybe you can save up and do what you wanted to do with the loan a little later. Because you must ask yourself whether you're ready to lose your house. For instance, assuming you're told that we want your title, we want your car. Maybe your car is loan-free, but now it needs to be tied. If you're ready to risk losing that item, then it means that loan is justified. But if you're not ready to risk losing, then you can do without that loan and consider just doing without that loan. Once you think about, you're settled about the security and how ready and willing and worthy it is, think about the creditor that you're deciding to approach. For instance, amongst the creditors that we have banks, we have SACCOs, we have microfinance lending institutions, we have insurance companies, we have informal financial services. Maybe we never thought about this as creditors, but we have them all over. The chamas, which we call, they are welfare clubs. We have the merry-go-rounds. We have the mobile lenders. Nowadays, they are all over. M-Pesa, Tala, Zash, you hear all manner of them. Other creditors that we may never consider to be creditors are family members, our friends. Our employers are always at hand to give us soft loans, salary advances. And we also have one very dreaded kind of creditor, and that is the Shylocks. And we'll see why I call them dreaded. I would dread them. And all these creditors, and maybe you can add more that I have left out because I have just picked a few of those who loan us money. Who is your creditor? Who are you considering to go and get that loan or that debt from? The reason why you need to mind who the creditor is because some of them are more expensive than others. They give you money, yes, but you pay with a leg, with an arm and a leg. Some creditors are more accessible than others. So even when you're in an emergency kind of situation, you're able to just go without a lot of, blocks. You're able to reach and access the credit that you wanted so that it serves the purpose that it was meant for. Some of the creditors are more friendly and considerate. Some are more humane. They listen to you. They consider your issues more friendly than others. Also, some creditors have a little more cumbersome requirements than others. That is why you have to ask yourself, who is the creditor that I want to approach, depending on the kind of need for that loan that you have. So the thing is, do your due diligence. Don't just jump into someone you saw, we give money for this, and you run to them maybe without asking what is the cost of the money that they are going to give. What are the requirements that they are going to give me so that I qualify? So do your due diligence, and you will be much better off when you understand who your creditor is. Once you understand who the creditor is, you also need to consider the term or the period of the borrowing, because it differs, it is diverse, also depending on the creditor, depending on the kind of loan that you're taking. Some of them are long-term, some of them are short-term. Ask yourself, for how long am I supposed to service or repay this loan? Because the length of the repayment matters as far as even the cost of the loan is concerned, because the longer the term of the loan, or the longer the period within which you will repay the loan, the lighter the cyclic repayment, or the regular, or the repayments that you make in every cycle. But that monthly repayment may be lighter, but at the end of the day, that loan will be more expensive than the one you took for a shorter term. So the longer the term, the lighter the repayment, but the more expensive the money is. The shorter the term, then you will have a heavier repayment amount monthly, maybe if you pay monthly. But at the end of the day, you will have paid your creditor less money. So if you're able to bear with that heavier repayment amount, then you can consider going with that, so that you don't end up paying so much for that debt. Another thing to consider is the interest. Once you know you are going to borrow for this period of time, think about the interest for that loan or for that debt. And when we talk about the interest, we are talking about the rate of interest. Of course, if you get someone giving you lesser interest, you take the lesser interest. It's not only the number, like the rate. You also consider the cycle of the interest. Is it an annual rate? Is it a quarterly rate? Is it monthly? Is it weekly? Like the way we have said that there are so many lenders and creditors that are giving money. If someone is giving you money and is charging you interest per day or per week, they say they are charging you 10% per week, then that is very expensive money. So consider the rate and the cycle of that rate. Is it an annual rate? Is it a quarterly rate? Is it weekly? Because the annual rate will definitely be cheaper. So don't just look at they are telling you, I will charge you 3% within, per what? Per quarter, per year, per month, or per what? And then it helps you in your decision as far as the cost of that money is concerned. The other thing that we also need to know, you can see in that red-blue picture, there is one, the percentage is on a straight line with an arrow, and the other one is like zigzag. They represent what we call a fixed rate and a variable or fluctuative rate. The fixed rate, it means that if you get a loan for 10 years at 5%, it means that that rate will never change. It will forever, for the entire period of that loan, it will forever be that rate that you have been given. If it is fluctuative, that is the one that is going up, down, straight, it is called variable rate. It means that that rate can change any time, depending on many things, and you have no control over. So when you're taking out that contract for your debt, please be very sure what you're signing yourself up to. Because if you know that you are not too sure how your situation will change in the next 5 years and your loan is for 5 years, then you'd have to think and weigh and evaluate whether you are better off with that fixed rate. And in which case, even if that rate went down at the 3rd year, yours will still stick at that fixed rate. Depending on many circumstances or many issues, we can't say which is cheaper and which is more expensive because it depends on many things. But don't sign a contract because, for instance, if you signed a loan contract with a fixed rate and you hit a jackpot after 2 years of your loan, and you go to your financier or your creditor and you're saying you want to pay off. And I'm sorry, because many people go and get shocked because you get there and you say, I have found I hit this jackpot, I want to pay off. And sorry, because you have to pay the entire amount that you would have paid for the 10 years. It doesn't matter whether you pay at the 1st year, at the 5th year, or at the 10th year. So that is why it is important for you to know what are you signing yourself up to, so that you don't end up getting frustrated when you go happily thinking you want to pay off and you know your balance is this much. The creditor or the financier will calculate the rate to the end of the agreed period of time and apply that interest for you. The other aspect of the interest rate that you have to consider when you're looking at your contract or before you sign up for any loan is whether that interest is simple or compounded. Because simple interest is good for loans and compound interest is not so good for loans because it rises very quickly and it keeps your principal loan rising all the time. So it may not be very ideal for you unless it is all that you can get. So it's good to have that consideration so that you don't suffer without knowing. And even if you are tempted to go and recover, you will have no one to blame, you have nothing to fall back to, because if it's in your contract and you sign it, then you can't change it down the road. The other item that you need to consider when you're thinking about loans and borrowing and debt is what are the other incidental costs that come with this borrowing. When you walk into that bank or that marketer or that salesperson comes to you and is looking for you to sign up for that loan, know that there are other incidental costs. Some are disclosed at the beginning, some are not. There is what some banks will call negotiation or commitment fees or appraisal fees. It is once your loan is approved, you can't negotiate, you can't, even if you go to court, you would have to pay for it. It is due and recoverable from you, whether you will draw that money or whether you will take out that money or not. There is also the aspect of legal fees that is applicable. There is valuation fees if there is some property to be valued or assessed, or business, because if it's property, it has to be valued. There is also insurance fees, because depending on the kind of loan that you're taking. And remember, there is also some government fees that applies on some of these loans. Stamp duty, search fees if it's about property, rates and rents to the council and to the county governments, registration fees depending on what legal documents need to be registered. So have in mind all these incidental costs that come with loans. Some only apply when you're borrowing. Some other incidental costs, it doesn't matter whether you're borrowing or you're financing the project yourself, they still apply. So it's good to know what applies when and where and how much, because mostly, especially when you're borrowing, these costs will go up to almost or between 7 and 10% of your loan amount. So if you're borrowing 10 million, you can do the math and get what 10% of 10 million is. Most probably that will be what you will be told are incidental costs. You are not paying to your financier, you are paying to other people, lawyers, valuers, government. So if you are working to borrow, you also have to have some money somewhere to cater for these other incidental costs. So be ready so that you're not stuck and you end up losing money, because if your loan is approved and you have paid commitment fees and you have no money to pay insurance, or you have no money to pay the stamp duty, which if it's for property, we know it's a bit high, it's 4%, then you will end up losing that commitment fees. So be cautious and be diligent before you walk in or before you sign any loan contracts, or even make that application, so that you are aware of all the costs that will run before you even get into it, so that you don't end up losing. And once we are done with all those considerations that come with loans, there is something I said, because we are almost coming to the end of the presentation, something that I said that we need to consider, that is not a consideration really, but it's something that we need to talk about, default. Because most of us find ourselves defaulting or falling past due what we are supposed to pay. Ask yourself, if you find yourself falling behind your repayment schedule, why do you find yourself defaulting or falling past due? It doesn't matter whether it's in 2 days, you are supposed to pay on 10th, and by 15th you have not paid, you are still past due. You are still considered a defaulter. So ask yourself why. Is it because your earning or some circumstances in your life have changed, which then will need you to consider seeking some help or consideration? Or is it just because your financial discipline or credit discipline is not good? Ask yourself that question. Because if you find yourself falling past due for the right reason, like your earning or other circumstances have changed in life, and you're not able to meet your repayment obligations, then there is always room to consider renegotiating with your creditor or with your financier or with your banker. Consider renegotiating. You can renegotiate for restructuring, for reconsideration of extending or stretching the loan, so that you don't suffer in silence. Maybe you got an emergency medical situation and all your money was taken. Don't shy away. Go and talk to your creditor for a discussion. And don't wait for your creditor to follow you. If you're not sure what kind of proposals you can give or how you can renegotiate, please see your experts in credit matters, and they will help you formulate something for consideration. They will help you, review or have your loan rescheduled, so that you don't, because when you default, you suffer penalty and it is not good for you. Then when you're defaulting, please find out what the default interest rate is, because there's always a different interest rate for defaulting as opposed to the one for the normal loan. And remember, there is also a lot of other consequences for default, which we'll consider. Whenever you fall behind schedule in your repayments, please do not wait for your creditor or your bank or your financier to come looking for you, or even that family member who we said they are also some of the creditors that we have. Look for them yourself. Look for them and negotiate. Because when you wait for them to look for you, then you look like you're trying to hide. But you should confront the situation and deal with it yourself. And it is part of the financial habit that we said leads us to financial discipline. Remember, default is not good, and the Bible is not silent about it. In Romans 13:8, we are told that we should let no debt remain outstanding, except the continuing debt to love one another. So if you have arrears in loving other people, maybe you may be excused. But if it's a debt to someone else, please pay it up. Honor it. And there is this example about this man who had borrowed, and Matthew 18:25. And since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. Remember that picture about the security where you are tied. He was sold, his wife, his children. In our case, we are saying that our properties, we have seen properties being auctioned and all manner of things. Let us be diligent so that when we borrow, we pay back and we don't become people with debts that are outstanding. The other consequences, like I said, about defaulting are very dire and are very serious, and it's good to just highlight them, because nowadays when you default, remember we have what we call nowadays Credit Reference Bureau. You can be blacklisted, and if you are blacklisted by one creditor, even when you go to another one and you stay there for several years, so your name is at stake as far as creditors are concerned. Remember, your reputation is at stake, because if like you're borrowing from SACCOs and you are required to have guarantors and references signing for you, then how is your reputation when you default and then they start being contacted that this person that you guaranteed has not paid for this number of months? So let us honor our reputation and not default. And like I said, there's always a higher penalty interest rate applicable when you default or when you fall behind schedule. And at times it's actually very high, that is very punitive. It may make your loan even shoot or overshoot or become double or more. There is also the issue of foreclosure. This is auction. Your property can be auctioned. So that's another consequence of defaulting to pay. Remember, there are also costs applicable or incidental to debt recovery, because once a debt recovery professional is instructed by the banks or by the financial institutions to demand or follow you, there is a cost, and that cost will never be paid by anybody else except you. So let's avoid. There is also the matter of attachment of income, like if your debt with government agencies, if your debt with KRA, with KPLC is outstanding, they can come and have your income attached, and it's legal. You cannot take them anywhere. So let's avoid. We safeguard our income by paying the debts when they are due, then they don't become overdue and so bulky, and we are unable to pay. And there is also the issue of litigation, unnecessary litigation, because if we were honorable to honor our debt obligations, then we won't suffer. We won't be all over going to court taken by financiers and other people that had to alipi pesa. So that consequence of litigation will be avoided. And even worse, there is the issue of mental stress, because if you're suffering, your property is suffering from foreclosure, and remember there are costs to that auction, you will undergo a lot of mental stress, and some of it cannot even be reinstated or recovered or repaired by an amount of money. So if we become diligent, we are better off. In conclusion, we say, before borrowing, consider the value and the cost of the money or of the borrowing that you're taking out. I mean, as in, what is the value of the money now? And what will it cost after I have borrowed? Because when you apply all those costs that we have talked about, incidental costs, when you apply the interest rates, when you apply all those things, that will be the cost of the money. So consider that value of the money that you're borrowing now and the cost of it, and then ask yourself, what is the better available alternative for me? Instead of borrowing, what can I do? And the available alternatives, and we touched on that as part of the actions that need to be taken last week when we dealt with financial freedom. You can think about saving, because if what you want to do with the loan is not an emergency and can wait for a year, why not build up that fund by saving the money, and it is not costing you any interest above it. Save and achieve that asset in a year or two. Another alternative is investing, because you can invest bit by bit, and then after a particular period of time, it starts earning you dividend, which you can now acquire what you wanted to acquire, maybe at the same value or higher, with the amount of money instead of suffering a very high cost of money, because money is not free. There is what we call the cost of the funds. So consider investing. And even a better alternative, depending on why you're borrowing, live within your means, because if you're borrowing to buy something that is out of your reach because your salary cannot afford, then you're living beyond your means. And you need to have the available alternative, which you have to do nothing but just constrain yourself within the limits of your earnings and just stay within it, and you will not suffer. Avoid the temptations of getting things that are not within your level of earning. Remember, we said everyone is different. We are all empowered differently. We are all talented differently. So let us just live within what God has blessed us. And another thing that we also need to remember, because I find that most of us, even when we borrow, we don't do that. We hardly review our loan statements. So I would encourage us to always make sure you review your loan statements so that you see where you're at constantly. Ensure that every item on your loan statement is correct, especially when you're talking about loan statements with financial institutions, banks, insurance companies, SACCOs, microfinance institutions, maybe even M-Pesa, because they have statements. Because at times you may suffer an item that was erroneously posted to your statement, and maybe it was supposed to go to another person, and then you never just look at your statement. So you end up paying money for, which you didn't borrow, which was not granted to you as a loan, just because you do not review or look at your loan statements to see what is happening. And if you find the loan statements a bit technical, go to your banker or to your expert and to your consultant and to someone who understands, and they are able to read and explain to you whatever items that are not clear to you. And that way you avoid suffering costs that are not due to you. And at times you may find even the wrong interest rate being charged on you. So let's just be diligent and take ownership of what we have borrowed. But if we are able to avoid borrowing, even better. And that brings me to the end of our presentation with those few highlights. Let's put them into our minds whenever. And it's not only when you are borrowing, even assuming now you're already even if now you are already in some kind of loan, you can still apply these things that I've talked about. You can look at the interest rate you're suffering. It's not too late. It doesn't matter whether you have already borrowed. It doesn't mean that they are only applicable to people who have not borrowed. Even if you have already started servicing your loan and you're in your second year, in your third month, in your fifth year, you can still go back and look at those things and see what is it about my loan that is happening and that is going on. And with that, I think we'll be towards getting off debts that are unnecessary, and we only handle debts that are necessary in our lives. Thank you very much. I think I will invite the moderator maybe to see if there are any questions, and we can move from there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joyce, for such a wonderful presentation. It was truly, truly valuable information. So right now, because of time, there is a question that Peter is asking, that it is estimated that Kenyans borrow 1 billion from Fuliza loans every day. Don't you think that this is a disaster? Maybe you can respond to that. If there is anyone else with a pressing question, maybe you can write it so that she can address those two together. Asante sana. Yes, Stephen has raised his hand up. So I think, Elder, you can ask your question so that Joyce can respond to both of them. Karibu.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Simon. My question here is concerning the loans that are taken on agriculture purposes by the farmers. They take a loan so that once they sell milk or coffee or tea, then they are able to pay. But at times they get disasters with the environment or climate, whereby they never pay. And then after many years, like 5 or 10 years, maybe even that time the governments have said that people are not able to pay, but they are forgiven. They pay the loans up to a certain limit and then they are forgiven, or it's just frozen. And again, it happens every now and then. What happens in such situations whereby you borrow? I don't know whether that money is always forgiven or every year, or what happens. I don't know. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Stephen. I think I will start with Stephen now that he came in later. And with the agricultural loans, and remember, that's why we talked about purposes. And it's not only you, the borrower, who looks at the purposes, even the creditor. So I am sure they have means and ways of cushioning themselves. And so when they talk about forgiving maybe the farmer, because there are measures like insurance. They take insurance for the loans in case of disaster, so that a particular percentage of the loan is compensated by insurance companies. And so the borrower in the farmer, so long as they did not divert the funds, they did what they were supposed to do with the loan, and just natural disasters happened, then the cushion is with the creditor and insurances are taken. And at times, the financiers would also go at a loss, maybe, and balance off with the years that they are not making a loss, and they forgive, which means they write off and forget those kind of debts from those farmers who did not, they are not just refusing to pay. There is this question about Fuliza being a disaster, and I agree, because Fuliza is like a credit card. And last week we said that if credit cards is some using, you are being deceived like you have money which you don't have. So maybe the Fuliza, because it's usually a credit, is an overdraft kind of a facility, because you are allowed to go beyond what you have in your M-Pesa. And an overdraft facility is what we are calling is like a credit card. If you don't need it, don't use it. You use Fuliza to go and buy that chicken I was talking about there. What would happen if you didn't go and get that chicken and you had beans in your house which you could have eaten and stay comfortably without a debt? So I agree that Fuliza is going to be a disaster, and some of the borrowers or the users of Fuliza may already be in trouble because of using it so much. And the beneficiary here, remember we said, if you borrow too much, you become a slave of the lender, or the Bible calls it the rich. So let's avoid it, so that we are not just enslaved to some people who are rich and they want to use us and milk us. I see the question there asking, I talked about Shylocks being a disaster, also even worse than Fuliza, I must say, because if you look at the rates that the Shylocks loan you money, they loan you money at such high interest rates that I would actually want to understand why someone would want to borrow from a Shylock. Because there are alternatives. Form a welfare club or a group or a chama and consolidate your money and lend within yourselves at an agreed rate. Because a Shylock, you're earning someone interest, and it is so high because they will give you, some of them give you up to 30% interest rate per month. And how much interest rate is that per year? If you're paying 30% times 12, how much is that interest rate? Ask yourself, and if you calculate, you can even faint because it is too much. So that's why I repeat that Shylocks are a disaster. I'm not spoiling any business for any Shylocks, but it's the fact. So let's rethink. Before you go to a Shylock, please think again. And some of the Shylocks will come and mess you up because they will take some security and you'll end up losing a lot of things because of going for that money. The other question I'm seeing here is what happens when where repayment is by checkoff and your employer defaults on remittance. Now, I think when it is about checkoff, where the employer has an arrangement with the financier and is a justified delay, maybe, still remember, the loan is personal to you. Your employer is just like a security now, because instead of giving your house a security, that is why they are called checkoff, because your employer becomes your security. But remember, the loan is personal to you. So if you know that your repayment due date is 20th, and you know that your salaries are being late, it is important that you take yourself to your financier and to your creditor and own it up yourself personally and excuse yourself before you are starting to be followed. And if you have spare money, you can make that repayment as you wait for your employer to remit the money. Because at the end of the day, the financier doesn't claim the money. The loan is not in your employer's name. The employer is basically just a guarantor, because they have guaranteed the creditor that they will pay that money direct from your payslip. But the loan obligation does not shift to your employer. So do the diligent thing, follow up your loans personally. And if it is something without your control, out of your control, you may not have the money to repay and wait for your employer to come in, then you go and just let your creditor, because again, we have said your credit record is very important. Advice about buyout of a loan by another financier and what to consider. Remember, when you're getting a buy-off, the questions that we have asked, you start with the purpose and all those things that we've talked about. So I would want to understand, why do you want to be bought off by another financier? Is it because the interest rate with this other financier is too high? Is it because you are getting a larger amount? And remember, even when you're being bought off, the costs apply. Because even the financier buying you off will not pay your legal fees, will not pay your all those incidental charges. They will also charge you commitment fees. So before you agree to get a buy-off, consider all those costs and see, is it worth the move? Because remember, the person coming to buy you off may be just out to sell, because I mean, I've sold credit myself, I said again, so it's not like I'm just talking with ill intention. So I am one of those people who did that. Remember, when I'm coming to sell a loan to you, I may be just trying to hit my targets on my side. And I am looking at you and seeing you qualify, you have security, but what is in it for you as a borrower? Are you getting a deal out of it? Or is it just for that bank that is seeking to increase its credit portfolio? And then you as a person, you are losing in interest, in other costs. So consider, but of course, and you don't only need to consider the interest rate, because someone will come and tell you they are giving you a loan at 15%, will give you at 10. But they don't take the time to tell you what are the other costs that are incidental to that loan, because I said interest rate is not everything. I give you 3% per month, and I tell you it sounds very low, but when you look at it cumulatively, it is more than the financier you are moving from. So you consider holistically, especially like in a situation where you are being bought off. Don't just move without considering all those things. And the final question I can see there is, can one renegotiate a loan that is already being serviced? Exactly. That you only renegotiate, you can absolutely renegotiate a loan that is already being serviced. In fact, you can even renegotiate a loan that is even bad, has gone bad, or has already fallen into arrears. So you are not restricted. But it depends on, why are you renegotiating? Why are you renegotiating? Because maybe unless circumstances have changed, but individualized depending on your circumstance, renegotiation is open. You can always put forward a proposal, and the worst that can happen is that the proposal will be declined. So it doesn't harm to seek to renegotiate depending on what your considerations are. And if it is to your favor, the better. If it is going to save you some money, the better. Because remember, we are saying we save as much as we can. We save from putting money into credit interest as much as we can, because it is leading us towards our financial freedom. And that interest that you're paying to someone, if you can have a way of saving it, even the better for you. So yes, you can renegotiate. And I think I have answered all the questions at the chat section. So I think I will hand it back to Simon.
Okay, asante sana Joyce. You've really answered them so well. And even for the people who have asked the questions, I hope you've gotten your answers. Na Mungu awabariki sana. Because of time, I just want to invite back our parish minister to just conclude for us. And we thank you all. Asante. Karibu mchungaji.
Thank you very much. Joyce will join us next week for a continuation of a different topic. So Joyce, karibu sana. You'll do at least 4 weeks, and we are happy to have you. So we could also prepare other questions for the coming Tuesday. Can we now all say the words of the grace? And now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us now.
Be with us now.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.